Morning, morning, morning. Yes, we're back with another episode, another rider. Today we're honoured to have Chuck in the house. He's all the way from across the pond. That's for America, for those who do not know that terminology. And he used to be he's in the Air Force, so me being ex-military as well, we have something in common along that lines. And he's going to tell us about what it's like in the Air Force, and also we're going to branch into talking about what he's doing for the community in bringing science or astrology to the younger generation. So nice to have you here today, Chuck.
Oh, thanks for being here.
Okay, so first of all, what kind of person were you when you were in school?
I was a pretty shy child, very much into sports, but also loved school, loved math, and anything science related.
Okay.
Grew up just outside the Boston area in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And found my way into an engineering degree, aerospace engineering at Boston University, and the United States Air Force that helped me get through school and then provided me my first job.
So why the Air Force?
Well, when I first decided to sign up, it was primarily a means to get an engineering degree, but it quickly became a lifestyle that, even after I fulfilled my commitment, that I decided it was the right career for me.
Okay, that's good. And how was the training? Because everybody talks about the training in the military and what you got to do.
Yeah. So the training, obviously it's very hard physically, but it can also be very mentally challenging as well, which because I was, I very much enjoyed being a student, was something that appealed to me. It was kind of funny because my wife, who worked in industry her entire life, industry just expects you to come trained and ready to work. The military takes you from somebody who is pretty much completely untrained, maybe having a background, technical degree, and all along the way, the entire 24 years I was in the military, there was probably about 5 of those years where I was a dedicated student learning something, a new technical trade, something about geopolitical, state of the world. I mean, that's one of the things I enjoyed the most about it, is the military really gets your mind working as much as your body, that needs to be ready, to be an officer and ready for combat.
So you were an officer then?
I was.
Okay, that's good. And did officer training vastly different from the private recruit training?
A little bit. I mean, so the enlisted force trains for more hands-on technical jobs. There's certainly element of leadership on the enlisted force as well. I think that comes a little bit later in their careers, but for the officers, the leadership part of it is emphasized from a very early stage, just as much as the technical part of it.
How did you find that doing the officer training course and joining the military changed your life?
Well, first and foremost, it afforded me the opportunity to move around and see a whole lot more of the world around me. Certainly living different places within the United States that I would not have lived otherwise. I probably moved about 12 times in the 24 years.
Okay.
And traveled, quite extensively, within my own country, not so much the world, just because of the type of jobs I did. They were primarily, stateside.
And what was a typical day like for you?
Well, that's one of the things I loved about it, is it was very, very few typical days, because I spent, so the 2 primary jobs I did over my 24 years was as an acquisition officer, meaning I managed programs, whether it's a new radar for an airborne platform that has a large radar on it, or I manage the development of satellite communication terminals that go on airplanes. And the other type of job that I had was in operations, space operations, controlling satellites. On 9/11, I was an operations officer at a ground-based radar. You know, where didn't really know very early on what was going on, and some very exciting times on 9/11. Obviously, you know, at a place where we're tracking submarine-launched ballistic missiles, wondering, you know, what's going on in the world at that precise time. So, you know, I've had kind of a varied background, and you know, a typical day, it never really seemed to ever be typical. You know, whether there was some element of training, physical training that would take place in a day. Obviously, you know, lots of meetings with contractors when I was an acquisition manager, but in operations, you know, worked various cruise shifts sometimes. You know, working night shifts or day shifts, doing that operations job, because it's a 24/7 operation doing space operations.
The job sounds very technical. What I was thinking is, where a lot of the equipment you work on, is it built by the military, or just a contractor has made it, or companies made it, and then you lot just maintain it?
Yeah, I mean, that's typically, you know, the way the military operates. I don't think it varies, you know, from one country to another, where there's developmental contractors, you know, build systems that the militaries, you know, contract for, and specify, you know, what they need. So that's primarily what it is, yeah. And then, you know, you may work with those contractors, you know, to help you operate them or troubleshoot them if something goes wrong.
So you did 24 years. Did you go overseas at any time, combat zones, or were you just
I was never deployed for combat operations. In performing space operations at the time, you know, when I was in, because I retired in 2012, pretty much all space operations at the time that I was in were performed somewhere within the continental United States. So we were essentially deployed in place even during combat operations, you know, providing the support that the deployed warfighters needed.
You spoke about doing collaborations, and you spoke about how we were depending on Russia to get launch satellites?
To launch humans into space.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, after the space shuttle program ended, the United States was dependent upon Russia for to get humans up to the International Space Station. But that's changed now that
Elon Musk,
such as SpaceX now.
Yeah. So the American government must love Elon then.
I think there's a love-hate relationship.
Really, because they gave him a $1 billion contract.
Yeah, I mean, very early on, you know, and personally, I am fascinated by Elon Musk, you know, and his commitment, you know, that to a long-term vision that humans, by necessity, will someday have to
Go to Mars.
Well, just have to be an extraterrestrial race. You know, with 6 or 7 billion of us on this planet now, there will be a time, and just necessity, just out of our curiosity as a human race. And so everything that he has done in reading his book has been to the pursuit of that. You know, even the businesses that he's built are all things that you know, are foundational, you know, towards his long-term vision. That's what I find so fascinating about him.
You say love-hate.
Because early on, when he first started his SpaceX company, he was on the outside looking in and wanting to have a contract with the government to launch government satellites. And you know, even though he's got that singular vision of what he wants to do as a businessman and as an entrepreneur, he really needed government contracts to help his business to be successful early on, because there just wasn't enough commercial business that could sustain him. And the U.S. launch market was dominated by two companies, Boeing and Lockheed. And so there really wasn't a place, you know, for Eli to try to get in the middle of that And so early on, people, were not happy with Elon for all the waves he was making with Congress to try to get in. But now, I think it's turned into more of a love relationship because he's built a very reliable system.
Okay.
And made launching payloads into orbit more affordable too.
I hear you. Okay. So we don't use Russian landing places anymore, but you said there's a collaboration between certain countries in the world getting people into space now, and satellites.
Yeah,
Can
satellites.
you explain how satellites get into space,
Sure.
please?
There's a few places in particular that are very advantageous to launch satellites from. One is the European Space Agency tends to launch a lot of spacecraft from French Guiana in South America because it's very close to the equator. The closer you are to the equator, the less energy it takes to launch something into space, especially if you want to get it up to what's called a geosynchronous orbit, which is where many of your communication satellites are. So, for European space agencies, French Guiana, for the United States, it's historically been a place like Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral on the coast of Florida. The other thing is you generally want to be coastal if you can, because you don't want to be launching over big population centers in case something goes wrong.
Wrong. Yeah.
So satellites, are placed atop of a rocket. They can only be so large, whatever the rocket can handle, and what can fit inside of what's called a payload fairing. So you're very much limited by physical dimensions, by the amount of energy it takes, and then by the cost. I mean, typical costs are sometimes, or has been somewhere around $10,000 a pound of payload to get into orbit. So it could be very expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars to launch a satellite into space.
So once the satellite's up there, you see it floating around. How does it stay out there?
Well, in order to escape the Earth's gravity to get to orbit, you have to accelerate it to a very high rate. And then once you get it to a certain altitude, it achieves its own speed. And essentially, being in orbit around the Earth means you're constantly falling towards the Earth, but with the Earth rotating and the forward movement of your spacecraft, you're just circling the Earth. But you have to attain a certain velocity in order to keep that orbit.
Okay.
And it's counterintuitive, but you're going faster the lower you are, but in orbit. So the space shuttle, for instance, and the International Space Station, which are only about 200 to 250 miles above the Earth, are going about 17 or 18,000 miles per hour in order to keep their orbit around the Earth. The higher you go, the slower you're actually going. So, but it takes more energy to get to that higher orbit. So it, like I said, it's kind of counterintuitive, but that's kind of the way orbits work. And you apply energy either to speed up and get lower to the Earth, or apply energy to slow down a little bit but push your orbit higher, around the Earth.
So what happens when a satellite falls out the sky? Is that common?
Well, it's been intentionally done because, especially, something as small as a satellite, when it runs out of fuel to keep doing its mission.
Oh, it has fuel?
Yes.
Wait a minute. How long is this satellite in the sky for?
Well, it depends upon what the mission is. Some of the satellites that we've launched into, say, the geosynchronous orbit, they can be up there for, 15, 20 years.
All right.
Performing their mission.
Is a satellite much bigger than this car?
Many of them are, yes.
The reason why I'm asking this, because what kind of fuel, can you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
What kind of fuel lasts that long
Well,
for 15, 20 years?
So it depends upon the satellite. Some of them are using chemicals that are mixed, oxidized and, expelled, to create thrust. Newer satellites now are actually using thrusters that are based upon electricity and plasma that they create that creates that thrust that they need. And there's been satellites before that have actually relied on nuclear propulsion as well. That's very uncommon, but it, you know, it's happened before.
So I'm just thinking 15, 20 years, and even if the car was twice the size of a satellite, even if it was like an articulate, one of a big truck, lorry vehicle size, that means that they have the means to have energy sources down here that can last for a lot, like you could charge your car or fuel your car once and just drive on that.
Well, so the other thing too is satellites have, just about every satellite has solar arrays. So their electricity is generated by the sun. And when you're off the planet and you're out in space, there is abundant solar energy hitting those solar arrays. As a matter of fact, the limitation on the amount of electricity you can generate is limited just by the efficiency of those solar arrays, which is the same problem we have here on Earth. You know, we have these vast solar array farms to try to, you know, capture as much of the sun's energy, which, you know, obscured by clouds, but even in places where there's not a lot of clouds, it all comes down to how efficient those solar panels are in capturing the solar energy and generating electricity from it. A satellite needs much less power. I mean, we're talking, you know, 10, 15, 20 kilowatts of power. That's not a lot, you know, compared to, you know, what we're trying to generate for what we need to do here on Earth, you know, to live our daily lives.
Okay. So that's very informative. You're doing a project now or something where you said you're educating young people. Tell us about that. What's the name of it? Where can people find you?
Right. So I started my own company this year called Supra Solem Observing. And what I am attempting to do, so my hobby is astronomical observing. I've got my, well, let me start with this. After I retired, I got very much interested in doing hands-on astronomy with a telescope, observing different stars, different things that you can see in space, like, you know, stars exploding, called a supernova, or physically watching. As a matter of fact, my observatory is going right now, and I'm watching two stars that are orbiting each other in 8 hours. I mean, that really blows your mind. These are stars that may be 100 light years away, and they're going around each other in 8 hours. They're that close. And that's, you know, the type of thing that I got interested in as a hobby. I bought my own telescope. I had it in my backyard for a while, and now I've remoted it out to California, where there's darker skies, much more clear weather out there. And I've started a company to make my observatory available for community colleges, for high school students, or just other amateur observers or researchers, you know, at what is much less costly than most other robotic astronomy companies that might be, you know, offering their services for, you know, $50 to $100 an hour. You know, I'm looking at about $10 an hour. You know, basically the cost for maybe a night out, you know, a night out for dinner for, you know, high schools or community colleges to be able to, you know, teach students about what's going on in the universe around us and get them interested in that.
That sounds really good. You got kids yourself?
I do. Both my kids are older, and one's working for the government as a lawyer in the Commerce Department, and the other one works for the same company I do, and he's an industrial engineer.
I was going to say, one of them has to be gone down the route of what you do. If you could do it all again, would you do it any different?
No, I absolutely loved serving my country. You know, the military taught me a lot, which has endured my entire life. You know, instilled values that I think will endure in people for a long time to come. And no, I wouldn't do anything different. No regrets at all about what I did.
Okay. I've got two questions in one, in a sense. What have you learned from your extensive career that you wish you knew when you started? And what would be your advice to a young person who wanted to follow the same route that you had taken?
Yeah, You know, it starts very early on. I mean, for me, you know, one of the very first memories I still have was seeing the first landing on the moon in 1969. So that really inspired me. So, you know, I kind of knew what was inspiring me about, you know, wanting to do something space related my entire life. And I think it really comes to the parents and helping, you know, a child be, you know, have something that is inspirational in their life that, you know, helps them to, you know, having a goal is great. I mean, even if you don't attain it, that doesn't matter. It's just, you know, having something that is really, you know, offers a passion, because in the end, that's what space and, you know, my astronomy now has offered me, is something I'm really passionate about, and that, you know, in 5-10 years when I'm retired from what I'm doing and permanently retired, I'm going to have astronomy and observe, you know, continuing to want to learn about the universe for the rest of my life.
I think you should do a podcast.
I think I just did.
No, I mean your own. I think you should do, within your company, you should have a podcast.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will
Because
think
you've
about
got a
that.
wealth of knowledge, and just every so often, once a week, have a guest. And then your first guest will probably be Neil deGrasse Tyson. And then that would push your podcast through the roof, and just tag all the universities, astronomical universities around the world in.
Well, that would be a very lofty goal. I would settle for, right now I have one permanent client for my company. It's a researcher at Purdue University. And he is kind of my anchor client right now. I am helping him build basically a crowdsourcing capability for searching for that next supernova that is going to take place in our galaxy.
Okay.
We are way overdue for a supernova in our galaxy.
Okay.
So I'm excited to just help, you know, people do their research as well as, you know, just science and technology and helping students as well.
Well, seeing as what you're doing, we've come to the end of the journey now. If people are listening to this and want to get in contact with you because they're really motivated, inspired by what you do, where can they find you? Are you on Twitter? Are you on Instagram?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, but I also, you know, have the website for the company. It's Supra Solem Observing, SUPRA SOLEM, which means beyond the solar system. So Supra Solem Observing, all run together.com.
Okay.
And all my contact info is on there.
Well, thanks a lot for that, and we wish you well.
All right, thank you very much.
We hope that episode enhanced your life. We post an interview every day, as well as vlogging on our social media channel. Don't forget to subscribe to get our latest episode.